Skeeto Girl Evolution, one
Right.
chapter,
Say
dark
a
and
40-year-old man
twisted.
writing a 17-year-old girl from 17th century.
Nice, Sean.
Well, that is highly specific, and I'm going to give you an answer, not just to write 17th century 17-year-old Finnish girls, but also how to write anybody who is very different than you. And I'll start by saying there's some really common mistakes when you're trying to do this. The first one is the historical trap. If you're writing people from a different age, sometimes people think if they just throw in some these and thous and mayas, all right, great, they're done. Like, it's authentic dialogue now. Well, not so much. And a second common mistake that people often make is beware of the ethnic trap. And the ethnic trap is just where you give sort of the stereotypical way, I don't know, a Chinese person would speak or a Hispanic person would speak based on long-running stereotypes. That doesn't work well either. A third mistake would be you should really beware of the age trap. And an age trap is when you're just writing someone of a different age than you. And so you throw in some slang from that era, you know? You throw in some Gen Z or Alpha slang and you're like, I'm right, I nailed this. Ay. No, just please don't do that either. And the fourth mistake that people make is you gotta be aware of the gender gap, because when you're a man writing a woman, don't just talk about periods and boobs and stuff all the time. It's not a convincing way to portray them. If you're a woman writing a man, you shouldn't always be talking about muscles and stony silences. I mean, if you really want more about that, you can watch my videos on gender, or don't, because those were controversial. I got a lot of pushback on them, but still, I mean, maybe you should watch them because I thought they added some really helpful conversation bits on how you can write the opposite gender. Anyhow, do or don't, whatever. Let's move on to figuring out positive ways that you can go about creating characters who sound real even when they're really different than you. I'm gonna give you 8 steps, and I really encourage you to go through every single one of the 8 steps because every single one is necessary. The first one's gonna seem not very important, but just trust me, it actually is. Generate your character.
Generate your characters, metaphors, and similes.
Metaphors, and similes. So your goal is just to figure out 5 metaphors or similes that this particular character would say. And to really do this well, you need to think about your character's world and the type of comparisons that they would make. Like if you were a boomer and you're trying to write a Gen Z or Gen Alpha character, then maybe you can come up with similes or metaphors like this. Like trying to speed run homework, or that's more cringe than family vlogging, or like spawning into the wrong lobby. What's absolutely key is you can't take your familiar metaphors and similes and apply them to this very different character, so you really have to come up with completely different ones. Now for our 17th century Finnish girl, let's think about her sensory environment. She might have never smelled car exhaust, but she knows the gamey taste of reindeer. She knows what birch smoke smells like and looks like as opposed to pine smoke. And she knows what frost looks like when it appears on the insides of windows. So you take really minute details like that and look for ways for her to use that as a metaphor comparing something to those things. A second really helpful thing that you absolutely should do to make your character's voice come alive is to identify what they
never say directly.
Never say directly. So everybody has things that they don't describe directly in language, and instead they use, you know, euphemisms to sort of slide around them. And it might be helpful to come up with categories for the things that this particular character wouldn't talk about, and instead would use euphemisms for. Stuff relating to the scatological, stuff relating to sexuality, stuff relating to authority figures. So let's run down the list and sort of check out some examples of what I'm talking about. In the South, you wouldn't say, "You're an idiot." You'd say, "Bless your heart."
Bless her heart.
If you were European clergy in the 1600s, you might not say, "Oh, he kicked the bucket." Instead, you would say, "He went the way of all flesh," which is a biblical allusion. A modern CEO would not use direct language like axing or firing, but instead use horrific euphemisms like right-sizing or optimizing headcount. And if you're in modern China, you wouldn't say the coppers took him downtown, you would say he got an invitation to tea. Or if you look at more formal, almost prudish cultures, then they might not say, "Oh, they're having sex," but instead would say, "Oh, they're having relations." And if you're writing someone from a Victorian era middle class, you wouldn't say, "Oh, she's prego," you might say, "Oh, she's in a delicate condition." And here's 2 examples for our 17th century Finnish girl, because yeah, we're still running with that. The first euphemism might be blessed condition rather than saying she's pregnant. And the second euphemism might be a woman's ailment rather than menstruation. And hey, listen, if you find my YouTube videos helpful, make sure to check out Bookfox Academy, because I have a whole bunch of more videos, like more than 230, on all sorts of different topics that will help you write your book, from a sentence course to a course on dialogue to a course on helping you write your novel. All those are really fantastic, and you get them if you subscribe to Bookfox Academy. As always, you've heard this 1,000 times from me. Link is in the description, so, you know, click it or something. Now, this third strategy for capturing the voice of someone who's very different from you is a really good one. You're gonna be like amazed by it. It's number 3, active.
Active, passive, divide.
Versus passive divide. So I'll just ask you, your particular character, do they speak in more passive sentence formations where they avoid any sort of responsibility and sort of put things off from them? Or do they speak in more active sentence formations where they are like cut and dried, taking responsibility, telling you right what's up? So passive heavy dialogue might look like someone who is trying to avoid responsibility. So instead of saying, I missed the deadline, they would say, the deadline was missed. Wasn't me. There was no I involved there, right? It just happened. It wasn't my fault. Or perhaps a person who speaks in a lot of passive sentences is a very self-effacing person. I think of a character like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. My tail has been lost again. It's not, I lost my tail, right? Or my birthday was forgotten. Naturally. So he rarely takes ownership of situations. Instead, he positions himself as someone that things happen to. In contrast, let's look at someone who uses a lot of active verbs in their dialogue. Think about Jack Reacher from any one of the lead child novels. This is a man who says, I saw the problem, I fixed it, I left town. Like, whatever it is, it's like, I am mad, I am doing this. This is not a man who is known for speaking in roundabout passive constructions. And, you know, little side tip here, if you ever wanted to make a really pivotal scene, then it might be amazing to have Jack Reacher finally speak in a passive voice, or to have Eeyore finally speak in a very direct active voice. Now, in regards to our 17th century Finnish girl, I don't know whether she's passive or active. You really could go either way depending on what you want her personality to be like. It's your decision. Now, this next one is a great way to create a character who's alive on the page, and it is number 4, find the disfluencies.
Find the disfluencies. Okay.
Fluencies. So disfluencies are just where people mess up when they're speaking. And everybody does this. Everyone has small little disfluencies in their speech that sort of give their speech an identity mark. Now, it could be, it's as simple as, say, using filler words. Like. And a character who does this a lot would be, say, Cassie in Euphoria. She puts like into almost every sentence. She's constantly saying like. Even when she's talking about really serious, big picture, philosophical, life-changing stuff, she is using the word like. For our 17th century Finnish girl, maybe she is the disfluency of sentences trailing off without finishing, right? That could be something that she does. Or if you want, you could really give your character much more serious disfluencies. Think about how in Stephen King's It, the character Bill has a pretty serious stutter. Or in Jonathan Lethem's novel Motherless Brooklyn, the main detective character played by Edward Norton, he suffers from Tourette's. A fifth thing you absolutely need to do to capture
idiosyncrasies.
this person's voice on the page is to, number 5, list what your character says.
List what your character says
most often. So your goal, your mission, is to just come up with a single word or a phrase, it could be a phrase, that your character says frequently. Now, this could be something like a catchphrase. For instance, Joey in Friends always says,
how you doing?
How you doing? Yeah, they used it. Smokey, how you doing?
Inconceivable. Or what your character says, it could be a verbal tick. Think about Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. Jay Gatsby is always saying, old sport.
Don't worry, old sport, don't worry.
That's how he refers to all these other people, is like, hey, old sport. Or Boomhauer in King of the Hill constantly says the word man. Like, come on, man. Tell you what, man. Every single sentence of this seems to shoehorn in a man or two. A really fun example, I think, would be Doctor Who, specifically the 10th Doctor, who is constantly apologizing. He is constantly saying, I'm sorry, or sorry. So your goal in your novel is to pepper your character's conversation with this word that they say more than any other word. Now, your goal through doing this is to give your character a verbal identity. It will set them off from other characters around them. Now, for your 17th century Finnish girl, I did a little bit of research into Finnish language, and I think my best guess would be that she would say most often the word well or so. Well, I don't know, or well, I walked. So, you know, I mean, that's my recommendation, but obviously you can come up with whatever you think your character would say most frequently. Now, this next one is probably the trickiest one to pull off well, but I think it is also the most essential one to capture a character's voice, and it's number 6. Nail your character's syntax.
Nail your character's syntax.
So syntax is a big umbrella term referring to the order of words in a sentence. Which words come first and which ones come later. So, say you are writing an autistic child and you are not an autistic child. How do you capture that voice authentically? So, to learn how to do this, let's look out into the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime. Here we have a character called Christopher, who is autistic, and I think what's notable about his speech patterns is that they are very ordered. It's precise and logical ordering of everything. A second thing that's really interesting to note is there is minimal emotional modifiers, right? He keeps it very even keeled. And lastly, there's a lot of lists in what he's saying and a kind of mathematical precision in his dialogue. And I have 2 suggestions for the 17th century Finnish girl, or, you know, for anyone else out there, because I think these apply to anyone. One, you could have her ask a lot of questions, right? That's a specific formulation that, you know, she's an inquisitive person, or perhaps she's trying to say something but not make it seem too forward, and so instead she asks a question. Or a second example would be to have her speak in a lot of short sentences. That is certainly a dialogue marker that makes her sound more unique and more like individualized character. And by the way, if you like what I'm talking about in this video, there are 2 courses that I think would help you in Bookfox Academy. One would be my course on dialogue writing, because that is a lot about how to capture characters and make them feel real just by what they say. And then the second thing which would be good for you would be my sentence course, because it takes you through how to construct sentences that sound as if they're from a bunch of different people, how to capture different people on the page. Now, not a lot of authors think about this 7th point, but it is an absolutely essential one. It is make their
All right. Make their social position influence their speech.
social position influence their speech. So if you think about it, the way that people speak is affected by their pecking order in society. So think about a character like Samwell Tarly in Game of Thrones. He is very low on the totem pole of social power. So because of that, how does he speak? He hedges a lot of the statements he gives because he's very hesitant and he doesn't want to come off as too forward. So he'll start sentences with stuff like, I think, or, well, I read once, or, but perhaps I'm wrong. And then in contrast, look at a person who has very high social power. What might they do? Well, they might refuse to be interrupted. And I actually had an uncle who would speak in this way. If anyone ever tried to chime in on what he was saying, he would just keep speaking. He would speak over them. He would refuse to be interrupted and would speak until he was done speaking, if you know what I mean. And it was a way for him to signal that he felt he was more powerful and important than you. Now, the 17th century Finnish girl, she could be from nobility, she could be a poor farm girl. You said rural though, so that makes me think oh, she's more on the poorer side. For an example of this, let's look at Kristin Lavransdatter, which is a book by Sigrid Undset. This is a novel set in Norway in the 14th century, and she happens to be the daughter of a very affluent landowner, which, yes, it's a different situation, but I think you could probably do the opposite of this. She has very formal, courteous speech, and she uses all the proper honorifics. She has a very sophisticated vocabulary with a lot of reference to religion and literature. And she also has really good code switching ability, so she can speak in one way to aristocrats and in another way to the servants. So if you're writing a character who is rural and has none of that education, you strip away the vocabulary, make it very, very simple. You have them mess up on honorifics, and you have them mess up when speaking to someone of noble birth. Now, this last point addresses some of the most common mistakes that authors make when they're trying to create a character whose voice sounds different. It is number 8, adjusting
for time periods.
Time periods. So a lot of authors think that when they write a character in a different time period than themselves, they have to perfectly replicate exactly how that person would speak. And I just want to caution you against that. Hilary Mantel, in her historical novel Wolf Hall, is not using thou and thee and hast, even though that would be the appropriate language for that time period. No, she's updating the language so it sounds familiar to modern day speakers. But how does she still make it sound like it's coming from a different time period? Well, I'll make 2 observations. One, through very slight syntax variations. Though she be a simple maid, it just inverts the order a little bit. She doesn't say, even though she's a maid. No, throwing in that be gives it a little bit of an archaic tone. And secondly, she just uses nouns of that period. So she says stuff like lordship and ruffians. Now, if you're writing characters set in the future, you also don't have to make their dialogue significantly different than our own. Now, in William Gibson's Neuromancer, they do say stuff like, oh, jacking into cyberspace, or I'm gonna punch deck. And yeah, those are great futuristic phrases that really work for the world that he's created. Or you could say update cursing, like in Battlestar Galactica, they always use the word frack. And if you were writing in a slightly different universe, you can always play with the very structure of language as well. For instance, in A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers, she has her characters' pronouns always be they. Or in Anne Leckie's Ancillary Justice, all her characters, their pronouns are she because their language lacks gender markers. So to bring it back around to our 17th century Finnish girl, let's pick some nouns that might be appropriate for her. She could use the word trencher because that's the name for a wooden plate. She could also use a word like headband because women in those days used to wear these scarf-like headdresses. Anyhow, I hope all that information helps you write characters whose voices are vastly different than your own. You can do it, you can pull it off. A little bit of research, a little bit of elbow grease, and your character will come alive on the page. And lastly, don't forget to check out Bookfox Academy in the link below. And happy writing.